encourage people to sort of push their boundaries a little bit, maybe, learn to swim a little bit better, perhaps enter a competition, whatever, or even just take those first steps paddling in the sea. So we're very much about encouraging that, but we're also working towards really forming a community, building a community of swimmers, helping people sort of, come out of isolation in some circumstances, and really just have a nice time. What else do I need to say, Anna? Do you want to say a few words?
The thanks.
Come on, we can't do the thanks. No? Right, we're going to leave the thanks until later, but I'm really, really pleased to introduce Dr. Heather Massey, and I know a lot of you have come here just to hear her speak. I'm not going to say much more, let her introduce herself. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll just wait for the clips to come up. My name is Dr. Heather Massey. I work at the University of Portsmouth in the Extreme Environments Laboratory. I'm a channel swimmer. Oh, sorry, wrong meeting. Okay, yeah, we are going to be talking about cold water immersion, kill or cure. Now, I'm mainly talking to an audience of people who are either very new to open water swimming or are thinking of taking it up. So I'm well aware there are some channel swimmers in the audience, and so they know a lot about cold water swimming, and hopefully most of this applies, but some they can shortcut a little bit. Okay, so they're my presenter's notes, so everyone can see what I'm supposed to be talking about. Now, as I say, I'm an open water swimmer, but I'm also a researcher in how the body gets cold. So I'm going to be telling you a bit about what happens to your body when you get cold. I'm not here as a fun police. I'm here to try to promote open water swimming, but in a way which is reducing the risks to the smallest amount possible. We want to really try to reduce those risks. It's really important to do so. There's lots of hazards with swimming outdoors. And I didn't press, that wasn't a thumb click. Could you go back? Thank you. This is me swimming around the Isle of Wight in 2014 as part of an all-lady Isle of Wight swimming team. So hopefully the local reference is good there, and the St Catherine's Point is just around the corner. Okay. This area has a big historical reference to swimming outside, both here in Portsmouth, but also here on the island as well. And we have a rich tradition of open water swimming, which again is being rekindled over the last few years. Now, I've worked in and around this part of the world for quite a while. I used to work at the Institute of Naval Medicine in Gosport, just around here, and was fortunate enough to be able to stroll down to the beach at lunchtimes. And I saw these rather peculiar people getting in the water at lunch and having an amazing time, and thought, well, why not try that? That was 20 odd years ago. Then moved to Portsmouth Uni, which is just here, again, and slightly further away, 6 minutes walk to the beach, not 5. And again, we found, there's quite a few people that get in the water during the lunch break and having a fantastic time. So we're going to be talking not only about the problems associated with cold water, but also the potential for benefit as well. So at the university we have some absolutely amazing facilities, and this is one of them. We have a flume, a water treadmill in one of our climatic chambers, so we can heat that chamber up, we can cool that chamber down to around 10 degrees air temperature up to 50 degrees, water can go down to about 5, and we can make the room hypoxic, low in oxygen. We can also, rather dangerously, dangle a whole heap of lights over the water to simulate the solar radiation that you get from the sun. So whatever you can think of, whatever environment on the planet you can think of, we can try and simulate that in our flume. Now, Today I'm going to be talking about quite a lot of the science behind cold water immersion, cold water swimming, and it's not just my work, it's a whole heap of researchers' work, particularly at the Institute of Naval Medicine and also at the University of Portsmouth. And these are they, and the main protagonists are Professor Mike Tipton here on the end, and sadly no longer with us, Frank Golden, Rear Admiral Frank Golden. Okay, so we're going to start with just by looking at some basic information, basic data. Here on the vertical axis we have the water temperature and then the time during the year. And we can see that roughly the temperature of the water in Ryde gets to about 7-8 degrees in March time. That's when it gets to its lowest water temperatures. And in the summer it might top 17-18 degrees, very rough water temperatures. But all year round, the water in Ryde and around the Isle of Wight is very cold. So it's a big physiological insult being in cold water. So we'll start with some of the sobering facts of being in cold water. I've called this kill because literally it can. Okay, so I'm going to start by looking at some facts around the National Water Safety Forum WADE database, the Water Incident Database. And this is focused around the number of water-related accidents that result in death. Now, annually, the UK have between about 400 and 600 deaths which are related to being in water. And this has pretty much stayed stable for the last 10 to 15 years. There are efforts afoot to try to reduce this, but at the moment there seems to be no real impact in that happening. And just to highlight the point, here are some local recent examples. So last year we had a teenage swimmer die in Calshot. Recently we had a lady on the Isle of Wight pass away, struggling in the water. And most recently, a lady undertaking water therapy in the river. So these are things that we have to be aware of, that swimming in cold water is not risk-free. What we have to do is try to reduce those risks as much as we possibly can. Sorry, I'm trying to click and it's not working. Sorry, I need to remember to put my thumb up. Okay. So we'll look at the potential reasons for risk. And in the main, there are 4. So we have, to start with, we have the initial immersion in cold water. We've called that the cold shock response. That's where we cool the skin, and we get this big inspiratory gasp and hyperventilation, rapid, uncontrolled breathing that can result in us aspirating water, breathing in water, and start that drowning process. In those with underlying heart conditions, that can cause problems too. After that first cold shock response, which lasts for about up to 3 to 5 minutes, depending on the person, we get the short-term responses, which are the cooling of the superficial nerves and muscles, and they help to reduce strength and coordination. Thereafter, that's when we start to cool the skin. That's when we start to cool the deep body. So it takes some time to cool the tissues of the skin before you then start to cool the muscles and nerves, before you then start to cool the deep body. So if anyone turned around to tell you that somebody's passed away or got into difficulties and become hypothermic in 5 minutes, they're talking out their backside. Once your swim is over, that's not the end of your problems associated with cold water immersion or cold water swimming. We also have to look at that post-swim phase, where we are continuing to cool, and also how long it takes for us to rewarm. It's quite a protracted period of time. Okay, so firstly we're going to look at the cold shock response. So that is, we initially immerse ourselves in water. That change in temperature, that change in skin temperature that occurs when we immerse ourselves in water is the stimulus for the cold shock response. It's not something we have under our voluntary control, and as I've said previously, it can result in an inspiratory gasp. It's that followed by that rapid breathing, and we can't control that. As I said earlier, it increases the rate and depth of breathing and can drown and start the drowning process if you aspirate water. And this is why we recommend that you get into water very gradually, unlike David Williams in the clips previously, although he was getting in off a boat, trying to do a channel swim. So I'll explain a bit more about why he's more able to do this than most people. Now, if you're getting into the water nice and slowly, that's going to mean that gradually you're cooling your skin temperatures. So the cold shock response is going to be much smaller, but also your airway is going to be maintained above the water level, even in most wave conditions. Now, if you jump or dive into cold water, what you're doing is you're immersing the whole of the skin at the same time. That's going to maximise the opportunity for cold shock, maximise that inspiratory gasp, and maximise the amount of water that you can aspirate or breathe in at once. You also might cause something called an autonomic conflict. And this is where you immerse the body in cold water, and that causes that cold shock response that I've just been explaining. But by immersing the face in cold water at the same time, you also stimulate something called the diving reflex, and that has absolutely the opposite effect. So the cold shock could be the accelerator in your car, increasing your heart rate and your blood pressure, whereas actually by stimulating the cooling the face, you're also having your foot on the brake. So you've got, when you jump into cold water, you're going to have your foot on the accelerator from that cold shock, as well as your foot on the brake at the same time. Now these competing stimuli have a real impact on the heart and can cause some people to have altered rhythms, and in those with an underlying heart condition, that could descend into rhythms which result in heart attack. So it's vitally important, especially if you're new to open water swimming, is to make sure you fill out any forms that you're given in terms of the medical forms, and fill them out as honestly and completely as you can. If you have any underlying conditions, please contact your GP. I know it's really difficult at the moment to do so, but it's really important that you do. Okay. So I mentioned earlier that David Williams was able to jump off a boat and had no real problems with his cold shock response. It is possible to habituate that response, and we see that regularly. So regularly exposing yourself to cold water repeatedly can result in a big reduction in that cold shock response. So on this purple slide, what we have is quite an old experiment undertaken by Frank Golden, where he looked at that inspiratory gas and the subsequent hyperventilation, that altered breathing, that uncontrolled breathing. And over a number of days, with repeated immersions, we can see that the amount of breathing, the number of the litres of breathing has gradually reduced. And we see that quite regularly with people that are well acclimatised to being in cold water. I only add this photo because that's me in 2-degree water, having just competed at the World Ice Swimming Championships. And I'm surrounded by people that were so well adapted to being in cold water that even some of them that were going in the water at 2 degrees had no cold shock response. So it is possible to habituate yourself to very cold water, but it's a very, very gradual process and not something that should be rushed. Okay, we're just going to watch a very short film, and this is a film of Sharon Davis. Now, hopefully some of the audience members are old enough to know who Sharon Davis is. 2 minutes 50, possible, yeah?
Coping with the first few minutes, however, is no guarantee of continued survival over the first half hour. In cold water, even strong swimmers have difficulty coordinating swim stroke with breathing. Once again, the temperature is just 10 degrees. Most people keep their head up to avoid the cold, leaving the body in an awkward vertical position. that, the arms and legs actually become weaker and more rigid as they cool down. Over a period of time, no one can manage anything like their distance in warm water. As poor headway is made, panic can only make matters worse. Unfortunately, drowning is all too often the inevitable result.
Okay, Sharon, stop there. Stop there.
Okay, so after the cold shock response, we then start to move into the short-term responses. Now, you've just watched an Olympic swimmer swim in 10-degree water for 10 minutes and reach that point where she became cold and incapacitated. So she was swimming relatively efficiently, probably not her favourite stroke, breaststroke, but she was swimming in a relatively efficient manner before you start to see her legs really start to fall and become have a very high drag factor. Once you get to the point of being vertical in the water and making no headway, it then becomes more difficult to make any further progress, and your muscles are so cold. Because of that cooling, the strength is reduced. We know that strength in muscles is reduced by about 3% for every degree fall in muscle temperature that you achieve. And so it comes to the point where you can no longer maintain your airway above the water level, and that unfortunately results in drowning incidents as well. So there's a number of different reasons why people can have problems in cold water. Okay. Now, I've put this slide on because, okay, we've talked a little bit about the short-term responses. But what we can see here from this graph here is the distance that people swim per degree fall in their deep body temperature. And good news, ladies, is all I'm going to say, is the amount of tricep skin fold thickness on this end of this section. And the dots represent a number of different people. So what we're showing here is that those people that have very little skin fold thickness under their arms are going to be able to swim far less distance than those that have a greater skin fold thickness above their arms. So guess what, ladies? We found the good news for you. Okay. Absolutely. Now the reason for this, the reason for this is that the upper arms is where we get most of our propulsion from swimming. And if you're using these muscles for swimming, they're well perfused with blood. Now, if that's the case, you're swimming away, you're going to be losing a lot of heat through that muscle, and therefore cooling the deep body and cooling that muscle very quickly. Now, if you have a layer of insulation around that, you're going to be able to retain much more of that heat and therefore maintain your stroke more efficiently for much longer periods of time and greater distances. Now, I'm only showing this because we did some work for the international triathlon community, and we had to look at wetsuits as well as non-wetsuit swims because that's what triathletes do. And we looked at it not only in terms of how cold the water could be, but also what impact the cold water had on subsequent activity, as in the transition, but also going into the bike leg as well. So we'll start with the wetsuit bit to start with. So we wanted to see how many people could complete the bike. So from the start of the swim to the bike section. So we asked them to swim in different water temperatures and find out who could complete the swim. 10 degrees, we had to pull over half of the people out of the water because of the cold shock response. They weren't able to swim. 20 degrees, we had one person who became hypothermic in 20 minutes. So these people were exceptionally thin and also wearing a wetsuit. So we decided, yeah, okay, 12 was probably okay, but not perfect for everyone. Then at 14 degrees, everybody completed all aspects of the triathlon. Now let's look at the skin swimmers. We had our skin swimmers swim at 16 degrees and everybody completed all to the bike leg. At 14 degrees, one individual was removed because of the cold shock response and refused to swim. became hypothermic, and 4 were unsafe after they got out of the water to be able to handle their bike. So they weren't in control of their bike to be able to cycle. So we decided that rather than kill them on a road, we would stop them from doing any further activity. So actually this cold muscles can have an impact not just on your swim, but what you do afterwards as well. So we're going to move on in a minute just to talk a little bit about deep body cooling. But I think it's really important that everybody, even if you're in for a short period of time and you've cooled those local muscles around the arms, that you need to be aware that doing manual activities might be slightly more complicated. It might take a lot longer to warm up those muscles. So it's really important that you don't do activities that need lots of muscular control in order to do them. So riding a bike straight out of your swim, particularly if you've been in for a long swim, just give it a few minutes just to see how you're getting on. Okay, so we've cooled the skin, we've cooled the muscles, now we're going to look at cooling the deep body. And what I've got here is a graph looking at the change in deep body temperature. Now, by the way, we measure body temperature by 2 different ways. We can measure it by giving people a magnetic pill, and that records the deep body temperature onto a receiver. And that's probably the most acceptable way that we measure deep body temperature. The other is that we ask people to self-insert rectal thermistors. Obviously, it's not something that we do out in the field for obvious reasons. Training a big long lead around in a pilot boat is not ideal. So all of these studies are actually done in swimming flumes for that reason. But if you look at this graph, we can see all of these different coloured lines represent a different person. And we're swimming in 18-degree water, so not too dissimilar to what we'll be swimming in the summer. And we can see that some people heat up during the swim, and they're about a degree warmer than when they started, whereas others cool down and cool very quickly as well. So we can see there's a big variation in people's response to swimming in cold water. So we need to remember that we might be okay swimming for a certain duration of time, but others will not be. And so that's a really important point to take home if you're swimming with a group, that you're aware that you may be able to stay for longer, but other people might not. Let's take the water temperature down a bit. And now we're swimming in 10 degrees. And we see that everybody cools. Even the purple line and the yellow line that we're heating up in 18-degree water are now starting to cool. And that those that cooled rapidly are cooling even more rapidly. So the take-home message from all of this is that there's a big variation in response, and that as the water temperature cools, we're going to cool more rapidly too. Now, the reason for these different variations in cooling rates are primarily related to the amount of exercise we're doing, the heat production that we're creating, and as I mentioned slightly earlier, insulation. They're the 2 key points that we need to be aware of. Now, we've been talking about measuring deep body temperature, and this is not something that everybody can do when you go for every swim. And so, how do we know if someone's becoming too cold? And what is too cold? Well, we call too cold hypothermia, and that's a deep body temperature of 35 degrees Celsius. Now, we normally operate around 36.5, 37, that's what we'll be here. But what happens? How do we know if somebody's getting towards that hypothermia level? Well, there's some changes in our behaviour which occur, and I can talk about things like impaired manual dexterity, errors of omission, time of useful consciousness, but actually people struggle to remember that. So what they do remember is the umbles, and a very intelligent medic came up with this, because he found that if somebody's in cold water and their behaviours have changed so that they stumble, mumble, fumble and grumble, there's a good chance that they might be hypothermic. And so these are things that you can take on board really easily and identify people that may be too cold. Now, earlier, we're not talking about the end of our cooling journey when we get out of the water. So we've got a profile here of a swimmer who swims, starts to swim, and then cools down and gets out of the swim there. He still carries on cooling for another 40-50 minutes after his swim. Now this is an extreme swim, it's an ice mile, but it still happens even in the seawater that we have here today. We see this reduction in body temperature, so 30, 40, 50 minutes we are still much colder than when we got in the water. So again, we can come out of the water and be fine, and then we could descend into becoming hypothermic. So we have to again be very careful what we're doing when we get out of the water to make sure that we maximise the opportunity for rewarming. And as you can see, it takes a long time in some instances to rewarm an individual. And we can rewarm people in different ways. Now, we've done this in an experimental condition, and we have got people to swim on 3 different occasions and then looked at different rewarming methods. We had a control where they sat and shivered and were thoroughly miserable. We had an exercise session where people walked around the lab and they were miserable too. And then we had people in a warm bath and they felt okay. But the problem they had was the fact that they wanted to get out of the bath after about 5 minutes and we wouldn't let them. And lots of people think, okay, we'll go into a hot tub and that'll be absolutely fine. But there's 2 problems with that. The first problem is that, again, people want to get out nice and early from that hot tub, they warm the skin and they feel great. Their deep body is still cold. So as soon as you've dried off and that skin temperature cools down again, you're still back in the same situation where you've not thoroughly rewarmed. The other option is that they stay in the water bath so long that they're sweating. Now, cold water swimming is a dehydrator, and then you add sweating on top of that, and then you've got a real problem with dehydration. People try to stand up after they've been in the bath, and some of them feel quite dizzy, and we've had a few people just sort of fall over, faint, and bang their head as a consequence of trying to rewarm using that method. So there's a few issues with using hot tubs that I have. So try to rewarm nice and slowly and get some fluid and liquid inside you. Now, something that's less well known about and something that we're doing actively researching at the moment is something called non-freezing cold injury. For those people that want to swim in winter, this is a real possibility. And this is an ice swimmer's hands. I've been given permission to use this image, and they're exceptionally swollen, very painful, and it took a long time for this swimmer's hands to recover. Now, we're a little bit unsure about this condition, and we think it's similar to Raynaud's, but we can't be too sure, because the evidence so far has been collected from military populations, and most of those military populations are male, whereas most people with Raynaud's are female. And so we need a lot more further information in order to further this research. So you might see me on Facebook asking for participants at some point soon to try to look at non-freezing cold injury. I've talked quite at length, but if people want to take a quick snap of that, there's a synopsis of those arguments. And then what we're going to do is move on to just look at is someone taking a picture? Okay, thank you. I'm glad you're marshalling the troops. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so things we should do. Take this time standing upon exit in the water, get dry and dress quickly. The number of people I see at the beach when it's so cold that get out of the swim, they stand up and they survey what they've been swimming in. And they stand there and they go, oh, this is great. And the wind is howling down and the rain is coming down. Get dry and dress as quickly as you can. You're trying to reduce that rewarming length of time. The longer you stay wet and cold, the longer your rewarm will be. And it's absolutely imperative that we get you dry and dressed as quickly as possible. Swim in groups and each other. I've seen people go to the beach as a group and then the bomb bursts and nobody knows where everybody is. So it's really important you stay as a group and everybody knows where everyone is. Sips of warm drink and have a snack. Really important. If you feel okay, have a sip of a drink and warmth and a snack. Make your hands feel nice and warm by putting them around that cup of water or cup of drink. Do warm up slowly. Do some gentle walking if you feel okay, and only if you feel okay. And most importantly, I should really have put this first, tell someone if you do not feel well. It's important that you let people know. They're around you after the swim. You can get some help straight away if you feel unwell. Things to avoid. Driving immediately after your swim. I've already told you that you're going to carry on cooling. It might be that you feel fine when you get out of the water, hop straight in the car. 5 minutes later, your ability to concentrate may be slightly reduced, and that could result in you having an accident or causing an accident for somebody else. Staying in longer than you intended, again, big problems around that, and don't jump into a hot bath. Okay, thank you. So I've harped on a bit about the problems of being in cold water. So let's have a look at some of the potential for benefit. So I've talked a lot about very hard science, rigorous science that I've discussed there. This end of the argument is more experiential, more anecdotal, more qualitative. But I've had people contact me who've said that they've had, over long periods of time, they've had reductions in their blood pressure. So they've actually been, by cold water swimming, they've been able to come off their blood pressure medication. We've had people who've had chronic pain, who have been regularly swimming in cold water and have far less chronic pain. I've been contacted by a number of women who said that their menopausal symptoms have been reduced as a consequence of their cold water swimming. The evidence for reductions in migraine, again, is a bit mixed. Some people say that it makes their migraines fewer and far less severe. Others have had the opposite problems. There's some evidence around changes in immune function and possibly reductions in the number of people having colds. However, research that we've done comparing pool swimmers to open water swimmers show that they have no difference in the number of colds, but both sets of swimmers have fewer colds than their sedentary partners. So could it be the exercise, the fact people are exercising, that results in fewer colds? There's also some evidence around neural degeneration and the impact that cold water swimming may have on reducing neural degeneration that could lead to dementia. And then lots of information around mental health and well-being. So we're going to talk about some of the science behind this part. Okay. So to start with, this is a clip from October 2020, and it's a little bit sensationalist, saying it's going to hold a clue to a dementia cure. Okay, so it's quite dramatic. Oh, for some reason that's, sorry, just go back one, sorry. My bad, I've missed a slide out there. Okay, so this particular article is from a very small piece of research that was undertaken at Parliament Hill, Leiden. And the researchers had two groups. They had a group that were doing Tai Chi on the deck of the pool, and a group of cold water swimmers. And they took blood samples from these swimmers and from the people doing Tai Chi. And they found that those swimmers had a greater expression of a protein that reduces neural degeneration in comparison to those Tai Chi class members. And that's it. Now, this protein does help with reductions in neural degeneration, but we don't know what the mechanism is, and we're still waiting for that work to be published even now. So lots of room for further research there, and also for participation in further research as well. Okay, now we'll get on to the mental health and wellbeing stuff. And this is some of the work that we've been doing over the last 6-7 years. And we've been working towards this for quite a while. And the way you develop evidence, scientific evidence, is a little bit of very time consuming, but it takes a little bit of effort, and people don't understand that it takes a really long time. So you have to build up the level of scientific evidence from maybe a group of people that experience it, right through to doing some questionnaire-based activities, then start to build up some sort of scientific, rigorous research design that you carefully control, and then try and test it on a mass population. So that's what we've been doing over the last 6-7 years. So we've had a case report, and this case report came out just after the BBC got hold of the work that we were doing. And the individual in this case report was an individual who had intractable depression. She had been on medication since she was a teenager. She was really struggling, and she was at the point where she would do anything to see if she could relieve her symptoms of depression. So we kind of said, well, why not go open water swimming? We thought, give anything a go, so she did. So we got her into our labs at Portsmouth to teach her about the problems associated with being in cold water, like you've had today, and it didn't put her off, so that was great. We got her a swimming coach, and she swam twice a week over the whole summer, and by the end of the summer she was symptom-free and medication-free, and stayed that way for 18 months during that follow-up period. So that was pretty impressive, and we thought, okay, so it's happened to one person, we need to see if this is happening to others. So we put out a questionnaire. This is pre-pandemic, when there were far fewer open water swimmers, and we looked at collecting some data. So it's a small cohort of 720 swimmers, and we asked them a few questions, but the main question was, did open water swimming have a positive impact on your health, and did it have a positive impact on your mental health? And so for every one person that said it had no impact, 3.5 people, you have a half person, suggested it had improved their general health, their physical health, whereas 44 people found that their mental health had improved compared to the one that had no impact. So there's something going on here, because our survey says that. Sorry, that's a bit less awesome. But also, all these other people have been blogging about it, they've been writing about it, they've been doing all these other things that suggest that, you know, there may be some potential for improvement in mental health. So we thought we'd best carry on. This is looking promising.